I don't know exactly when I stopped hearing my name. It stayed somewhere back there, behind me, along with a childhood I barely had. At first, people just forgot to say it. And then I realized I didn't need it anymore. Here, they called us differently. Loudly, harshly. So it was immediately clear. You're not a person, you're a thing. You move. Be quiet. And I was quiet. I was always quiet. I was born in the South, not far from the river. I remember the dirt under my nails, the bitter smell of compost, my mama's hands, thin and strong. Mama didn't look me in the eyes. Not because she didn't love me, but because she knew it wouldn't last. They separated us when I was about 7 years old. They lined me up with others, and someone pointed at me with a finger. I didn't resist, just stood there, cold, watching them take her away. The first thing I remembered from my new life was soap. Not the smell, the taste. They made me eat it because I dared to say I didn't want something. Here, you weren't allowed to not want. No one asked. I belonged to Miss Maud, a white woman with thin lips and a voice like a squeaky door. I cleaned the kitchen, washed the floors, scrubbed the pots, ironed her clothes. All the time. No weekends. No holidays. When it was her birthday, we fried meat. When one of us gave birth, they beat us for not working fast enough. I learned not to think, just to do, to move, to look down, to press my lips together while chopping onions so no one would know I was crying. In that kitchen, the smells were stronger than life. Fried grease, sour cabbage, dusty coal smoke. Sometimes, when I fell asleep standing by the stove, I thought I might never wake up. And I didn't care. But in the house lived one old woman. We called her Celine. She wasn't the kind who bowed, not the kind who stayed silent. Even the white folks were afraid of her, because she remembered about Africa, about ancestry, about strength. She didn't tell fairy tales. She only spoke short and sharp. Listen when everything inside screams. I didn't understand, at first, what she meant. And then I did. I stayed silent for years. Until that night, Jonathan, the mistress's son, had just returned from the north. Young, smile white as sugar, voice slow. He didn't hit. He talked, and then did what he wanted. He came when he pleased, closed the door, and I knew I couldn't scream. Because if I screamed, they'd say I ruined everything. And then they'd do worse to me. Or sell me. Or I'd disappear. I didn't scream. I scrubbed the floor. I ironed. I watched others laugh. And inside, nothing. No anger. No tears. Just emptiness. Even when the body hurt, no tears came. Because tears are weakness. And the weak don't survive here. One day Celine came up to me and said, "You're not broken as long as you remember who you are." I asked, "What if I don't remember?" She looked at me and said, "Then it's time to remember." From then on, I started thinking again. Not hoping, thinking, analyzing, noticing. Who talks to whom? Who smiles at whom? Who gets angry? Who stays quiet? I began to see through them, as if everything became exposed. I learned silently, learned to live in a way that made them think I was dumb, learned to quietly reclaim myself. And then one day, when Jonathan walked into the kitchen again, I didn't look away. I didn't say a word, just stared, long straight, calm, without shaking. He froze, and then left, and never came back. Maybe he realized I wasn't a thing anymore. Or maybe he got scared. Men get scared when you're not afraid. That was the first time I felt something still alive inside. Not joy, not freedom, but solidity, like a stone that wasn't broken. After that night, everything seemed to stay the same. I still washed the dishes, ironed, cleaned, but inside, Everything was already different, as if I had put back on skin that had been taken from me long ago. Not because I became free, but because I stopped being empty. A slave doesn't become free when they're released. They become free when something inside says, enough. It's not a scream, not even a voice, just a silence that isn't afraid. I started noticing more, like how Miss Maud shook over her curtains as if her life depended on them, how her daughter would brush her hair for hours and cry if she saw a pimple in the mirror. And I looked at them and didn't understand. I didn't have a mirror. I didn't have time for pity. I had a back burning from the heat and fingers worn to the bone. And they had fear. The kind so deep they didn't even know it lived in them. Celine once said, "They're not afraid of us. They're afraid of what we remember." I didn't get it then, but later I did. We don't just scrub their floors. We see them as they really are, without masks. We know what they do when they think no one's watching. We are their mirror, and looking at themselves scares them. Sometimes at night, I couldn't sleep. I'd lie on the hard floor, wrapped in a torn blanket, and think, is this really forever? Will no one ever ask how I live? Is my body all I'm supposed to be? These thoughts didn't make me weak. They kept me alive. One day I saw them take Etta, a girl around 10 years old, thin, with quick hands. She cleaned with me in the kitchen. She was a good girl, smiled even when standing ankle-deep in filth. Then some traitor came, spoke with Maud, and Etta was taken. No goodbyes, no explanations, just gone. I watched her leave and felt something break inside me. That night I didn't sleep. In my head it pounded. You're next. But then I got up, in silence, went to the table, and stole a small knife. Small with a dull blade. I wasn't planning to kill. I just wanted to have something. Something of my own. Something that said, I can defend myself if I have to. I hid that knife under the mattress. It was dull, rusty, almost useless. But for me, it was a weapon. Not against them. Against fear. I knew I couldn't fight off 3 or 5. But I knew something else. I wouldn't let them take me again like that. Without will. Without sound. Sometimes I wanted to disappear. Not die. Just stop being. Vanish like a shadow at noon. But then I remembered, Celine saw me. And if even one person has seen you, you exist. You're still here. You're not erased. I didn't know what a future was. We didn't have a future. We only had one more day. And then one more. All we hoped for was to make it till morning. Not to break. Not to lose our minds. Not to disappear inside ourselves. Still, sometimes I imagined. What if one day I just walked away? No scream. No fight. Just walk, barefoot, at night. On ground wet from dew. And no one would stop me. Because no one would care. And I'd walk not toward freedom, but toward myself. I didn't dream of a house. I dreamed of silence. Of no one touching me. No one looking. No one giving orders. Just being able to sit. Quietly. Breathe. And know that no one had the right to come and say, "You're mine." Because I am not a thing. But until that happened, I was here. Among these walls. Among these smells. Among pain that you get used to like bad weather. And every day I told myself, today I am. So not everything is lost yet. My first white hair came early. I was ironing Miss Maud's shirts when I suddenly noticed one thin, silver strand at my temple. I ran my fingers over it, and my hand trembled. It felt like a mark. Not from age, from time. It had passed through me like wind through cracks. Nothing changed on the outside, but inside I was already different. Older than I was supposed to be. That same week, Nancy died. The old woman who swept the porch. She just lay down, and didn't get up. Didn't scream, didn't cry. Just fell asleep during lunch, on her feet, with a broom in her hand. No one knew how old she was. Maybe 70, or maybe 40, but lived like 100. Her body was carried behind the shed, buried silently, quickly. Not even her name was said. Only one boy, the cook's son, whispered, "She was the one who hid me when I was sick." And that was all. I couldn't sleep after that. I kept thinking, what if the same happens to me? I'll fall, and that's it? No name, no memory, not even a single word. As if I never existed. And then I started recording. Not on paper. We weren't allowed to write. I wrote in my head. Every detail. Every smell. Nancy's face. Celine's voice. Etta's smile. The words my mother once said before they took her. I repeated them at night. So I wouldn't forget. So someone could know we had been here. A woman who remembers everything is dangerous. I understood that later. Because forgetting is convenient. For them. It's easier to think we're just shadows, working hands. But I'm not a shadow. I'm memory. And when they started looking at me again, I looked back. Not defiantly. Not boldly. Just calmly. And in that calmness was a strength they didn't understand. A new girl appeared in the house. Very young. I recognized her immediately by her eyes. Just like mine once were. Fear hidden behind an obedient smile. I approached her at night, when everyone was asleep, sat beside her, silently, and simply gave her a piece of bread. She looked frightened. I said, "Don't be afraid. Just eat. And then, live. Whatever happens, you must stay yourself." She nodded. Not right away, but she did. After that, I began to notice people reaching out to me. Not for protection, but for silent agreement. Because I didn't ask questions. Didn't make promises. I just existed. And sometimes that's enough. For someone not to fall. Sometimes I wondered, what if I had been born free? Maybe I would have taught children. Or sewn dresses. Or baked bread. And no one would tell me where to look. But then I'd catch myself thinking, I wouldn't have become who I am. I wouldn't have learned how to survive without breaking. I wouldn't have learned how to feel others' pain. And that was a bitter truth. I lived among cruelty, but I still remained human. Celine died in the spring. She lay on her cot, breathing quietly. Then she said, "Now you carry." I asked, "Carry what?" She answered, "Memory." And that was it. Those were her last words. I remembered them forever. Because they were more than just a goodbye. It was a passing. A duty. A connection. Now I knew. My body belongs to them. But my mind is mine. And what I remembered, they could never take away. I became quieter. Not because I was afraid. No. I just realized words drain strength. And I needed to save mine. For each new day. For every loss. For every small victory no one knew about. Sometimes I would step out onto the porch at night. Stand in the dark, barefoot, feeling the cold of the boards. I looked up at the sky. And I wondered how many like me were looking at the same black abyss. Maybe someone else was standing just like that, teeth clenched, whispering to themselves. Just one more day. We didn't know each other, but we were together. And that was enough for me. I no longer searched for justice. There was none here. I searched for at least a little silence inside. So no one would break my mind. So no one would look at me like I was meat. I didn't dream. I calculated. Every step. Every word. Not to provoke. Not to anger. But still not to disappear. Not to lose myself completely. One day, one of the young white men, not from the house, a visitor, came up behind me while I was watering the flower bed. He said something filthy. I didn't respond. He grabbed my arm. Hard. And in that moment, I felt it. I was back. On the edge again. Inside, everything froze. I looked at the ground. Then I suddenly turned and pulled my arm free. I didn't hit him. Didn't scream. Just pulled away. He laughed. But he left. I thought I had failed myself. That I would break again. But I didn't. I just sat behind the shed and waited for it to pass. No one saw, and that was even better, because it was my victory, my personal one, small, but real. Over time, I became almost invisible, worked in a way that no one noticed. And I needed that, because in that was freedom, not full, but mine. Invisible freedom of a woman who knows when to stay silent, and when to look straight into their eyes. I thought I would die in that house, that I would stay there, under the sagging roof, in the kitchen that always smelled of smoke and grease. And I'd be forgotten. But fate decided otherwise. One day an order came. The land was being sold. The house was going to a new owner, and we, the slaves, were being divided. Like inventory. I didn't care where. I had no hope. But when I saw the wagon they loaded us onto, something stirred inside. Because I realized this was not the end. This was movement. Even if not in a better direction. What mattered was not standing still. On the way, we passed by fields where others were working. And I looked them in the eyes. Some lowered their gaze. Some stared straight back. And some just whispered a prayer with their lips. I didn't pray, but I listened. Because in that silence, between words, truth was born. There, at the new estate, everything was almost the same. The same walls, the same orders. But inside, I was already different. And one day when a young girl asked me, "Are you afraid?" I looked at her and said honestly, "Every day, but fear is not a shame. Shame is when you let fear become your master." I didn't know how old I was. We didn't keep count. Some counted by springs, some by changes of masters, some by scars. I had 12 clear marks on my body, each with a story. But I stopped counting them, because numbers don't tell the most important things. I just became older. Not by papers, we didn't have any, but by my walk, by my gaze, by my silence. The young ones came and went, broke down, screamed. And I stood, in the shadows, watching, remembering. One night I stepped out onto the porch again. Everything was as always, silence, stars, the distant barking of dogs. But inside, something was different. I didn't feel anger, didn't feel tired. Just one thought, I am alive. And that was enough. I didn't want revenge. Didn't want freedom on paper. I only wanted that someday someone would say my name, not as a command, just to remember, to confirm I existed. Then the whispers started, quietly, among ourselves, that something was about to change, that somewhere they were already granting freedom. I didn't believe it. I had seen how easily hope was broken here. But the girl, the one I had once given a piece of bread, came up to me and whispered, "If it's true, will you leave?" And I answered, "I've already left. Inside. Now, I just need to catch up with myself outside." A few weeks later, a man came, a white man, with papers, said we were now free. I didn't move, didn't say a word, just watched, because words are air. And I wanted to feel the ground under my feet. Real ground, without chains. Some cried, some shouted. I just sat, quietly, in the shadows, and looked at my hands. The same ones that for so many years needed dough, cleaned, scrubbed, washed. They trembled, because they didn't know what to do next. Freedom is not a door that opens. It's a path where you learn to be yourself again. And I didn't know who I was. Didn't know what I loved, what I could do, what I wanted. I only knew that no one had the right anymore to tell me who to be. I didn't leave right away. I stayed a little longer, taught the younger ones, not how to work, how to live, how to notice, how not to lose themselves. And when I was ready, I left, with no belongings, no goal, just left. I walked for a long time, sometimes at night, sometimes by day, under the burning sun, along paths, through dust. I walked, and with every step I felt lighter, as if pieces of old clothing, old fear, old voices were falling off me. And now I'm here, not younger, not prettier, not richer, but I am. I sit under a tree, and the sun falls on my face. And no one is shouting nearby. No one is commanding. No one is touching. Which means I have won. Maybe no one will remember me. Maybe my name won't be written down. But if you hear this voice, it means I'm still here. It means my shadow went farther than they thought it would. And if you ever feel like the world wants to take everything from you, remember, inside, you can always hide a spark. Even if all that's left is ashes, they're still warm. I am not a slave. I am memory. I am not a shadow. I am the silence they couldn't break. I am.